I was dressed for work, sitting at the breakfast table with a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper. Janet was still in the bedroom getting dressed for work. There was nothing special about this morning that distinguished it from any of the previous workdays in the past year. My eyes scanned the front page of the newspaper. There it is, in the middle of the page. I knew it would be there. Carmine told me this would happen last night. Carmine always does what he says he will do. A man found killed in his garage. The news article went on to say that Robert Toldson was found dead in his garage last night. He was beaten and then strangled with a noose. The article stated that Robert Toldson was an employee of the Calculus Real Estate Agency. Janet also works at the real estate agency Calculus. Police currently have no suspects. The investigation was just beginning. There was no longer any reason to read the newspaper. I folded it and put it on the table where Janet always sits in the morning. A sweet, warm feeling washed over me as my mind ran through all the factors that led to this morning. I was sipping my coffee when Janet walked into the dining room. My God, how beautiful she was. My wife of 5 years was more amazing today than when I first met her 7 years ago. There was no "good morning, dear" from either of us as she pulled back her chair and poured herself a cup of coffee. It's hard to believe how much our marriage has crumbled over the past year. Our eyes met for a brief second, a small smile crossing my lips as I greeted her arrival. She didn't tell me anything. This went on for the last 2 months. After the big row we had about her extended working hours, she seemed to crawl into her shell and didn't want to come out. Perhaps her coldness bothered me more than anything else. During our courtship and the early years of our marriage, Janet was a warm and loving friend. I really missed that closeness. Now it was all coming to an end. Janet took the newspaper in one hand and the coffee cup in the other. Her eyes scanned the headlines and began to travel down the page as she took a sip of her coffee. Suddenly, she spat the coffee out of her mouth and her eyes seemed to bulge out of their sockets. "Oh, God, no!" she screamed as her eyes were drawn to the article about the murder of Robert Toldson. I just sat in silence. I didn't need to say anything to her on this topic. Janet looked like she was about to throw up as she quickly rose from her chair and ran to the bathroom. I took a deep breath, stood up from my chair, and put my coffee cup in the dishwasher. With my briefcase in hand, I went out to the garage and got into my car. I didn't want to ask Janet if she was okay. It didn't matter to me how she felt anymore. My name is John Cannella. All my friends call me JC. I am 29 years old and of Sicilian descent from the Italian area of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My youth was spent mostly in trouble with a gang of other young Italian boys. We used to think of ourselves as the junior mafia. I'll skip most of the other bad things we got ourselves into and focus on one event that made a big difference in my wayward behavior. Carmine Vitalio and I were closer than 2 siblings. We were the same age and hung out with the same gang of guys. The main difference between Carmine and me was the mind. I'm not saying Carmine was dumb or anything. He just couldn't use his head to get out of trouble with the law. Even though he and I did most of the bad things together, he was the one who was usually caught by the police. One night, Carmine and I broke into a warehouse at the port. We were looking for things that we could steal and make some money. The guards must have seen us enter the building through the side window. They were waiting for us as we slipped back out the window with several boxes of MP3 players in our hands. One guard grabbed Carmine just as I was climbing through the window. The second guard tried to grab me, but I hit him in the face with the box. I jumped on the other guard's back and hit him on the head as hard as I could. He let go of Carmine when I tackled him to the ground. I screamed at Carmine to get his ass out of there as quickly as possible. Carmine turned and ran away. The second guard came to his senses and grabbed me from behind. There wasn't much of a fight after that. The guards were having a good time with me until the cops showed up. When they arrived, they laughed with the guards as they examined my beaten and bloodied body. I was taken to the police station and placed in a holding cell until my parents arrived to release me. In short, I never mentioned the name of the other person who was with me in the warehouse. I was given 2 weeks in prison and put on probation. Carmine called me several times to apologize for running away when the guards grabbed me. I told him it was okay because if he had been caught, given his previous arrest, he would have spent a year or more in jail. He swore that he would make it up to me, even if it took him the rest of his life. My parents were angry and humiliated by my arrest. My father spanked my ass with his leather belt until it bled. Then they told me that they were going to enroll me in St. Peter's Catholic High School because I needed to improve one way or another. Needless to say, the nuns and priests did a very good job in the discipline department. By my senior year, I had changed my lifestyle. One of the priests who became my mentor advised me to choose a different path in life. So I left the gang and finally did well enough that year to go to the University of Pennsylvania. Long story short, I did well in college and graduated with a degree in human resources. After graduation, it was easy to find a job in a good company. This time, my parents were proud of me. Even though I dated many women while I was in college, I wasn't ready for any long-term commitment. It was 3 years after college when I met Janet Facanio. She was the first woman who made me think about ending my single life. We met at a seminar for HR representatives. After the seminar, I took her phone number and said I would call her. She seemed quite pleased with this prospect. Janet was different from all the other women I had dated. There seemed to be many sides to her personality. At times, Janet seemed like Chris Costner, Sizemore in The Three Faces of Eve. The trait I liked least was Janet's stubborn nature. Whenever Janet made a decision on any particular issue, she could not be dissuaded from her beliefs, no matter how erroneous they were. Our courtship was an affair. We never indulged in sexual relations during the first year of our acquaintance. I learned that Janet was abandoned as a baby. Her mother left her in a pew at the back of the church and walked out of her life. Her early years were spent in an orphanage and then in several foster families as she became a teenager. I firmly believe that it was the absence of a mother to love and care for her that was the cause of most of Janet's personality problems. Despite all her problems, Janet was the most loving and warm person I ever knew when she was with me in those early years. My parents were not strong supporters of Janet during the years we were dating. They always told me that I would regret it if I got too involved with her. I didn't listen to their good advice. Janet and I got married in a small ceremony at a local church. We both agreed that we would put off having children until we were financially secure and she could quit her job and become a full-time mother. This fact did not suit my parents. In the 3rd year of our marriage, everything started to go wrong. The company Janet worked for was bought out by a larger company, and her job was eliminated. She was very upset about losing a job that she really enjoyed. We didn't have any financial difficulties, although her salary was a nice amount to add to our savings account every month. Several months passed before Janet finally found a new job. It wasn't a job she particularly wanted. This job was as an office manager at the Calculus Real Estate Agency. I tried to support Janet during her unemployment. Sometimes I felt like she resented the fact that I had a job that I really enjoyed while she had to settle for a second-rate job. For a long time, she had severe mood swings, especially during her period. After working for a couple of months, she gradually began to regain her usual pleasant personality. Things started looking better for both of us. Our sex life, which had suffered greatly during Janet's unemployment, was also on the rise. There were times in our bedroom when I felt that Janet was trying very hard to make amends by being more aggressive in our lovemaking. I never complained. For about 9 months, our married life was at its best. Janet became more enthusiastic about her work. She even started taking real estate courses. I was pleased with the change in her behavior and what a loving wife she was to me. Then it became a good news, bad news situation. Good news. I was slowly but steadily moving up the management ladder at my company. I worked with them for 5 years and my future looked very promising. Then came a merger with a company based in Atlanta, Georgia, which marked the beginning of a major change in my job responsibilities. Atlanta was to be integrated into our corporate structure. As such, I was responsible for training their staff and reducing headcount as needed. I was really excited about my new job responsibilities. Bad news. My new assignments would mean I'd be out of town more often. Janet wasn't thrilled at the prospect of me spending so much time on the road. Even during longer periods on the road, I was able to be home on weekends. At first, this seemed to calm Janet's anger at me being away so much. But, and there is always a but, gradually, my return home for the weekend did not seem enough to compensate for the time spent away from home. Janet went into her stubborn mindset, where she insisted that I liked being away from home, and she subtly hinted that I might have a mistress with whom I was spending time in Atlanta. Nothing I could do or say could distract her from this negative thinking. I called her at work during the day and every evening when she was at home. I sent her flowers at work and sent her humorous cards over the internet. Her coldness towards me continued. It took nearly 6 months to complete staff training in Atlanta. My days as a road warrior were coming to an end. In addition, I received a promotion at corporate headquarters. These were the two things that I felt would change Janet's attitude towards me. I was wrong. It seemed as soon as I stopped traveling, Janet started working at the agency longer. I tried to ask her about the reasons for her overtime. She gave me a sarcastic answer that it was now her turn to work for a promotion. She even said it was time for me to find out what it was like to be alone in the evenings. Our sex life almost stopped. 2 weeks ago, Janet told me that she and several of her agency's employees would be away for the weekend to attend a special orientation session with a developer who was starting to build high-rise condominiums along the river. She said that she needed to get to this developer. No one asked me if it would be okay if she left for the whole weekend. She was going to leave, and that was the end of the discussion. Although I stopped associating with the youth mafia when I was in high school, I kept in touch with several of my closest friends, especially my buddy Carmine. I called him and asked him if he wanted to watch the Steelers. The game was on Sunday. There was no hesitation in his voice. We were going to the game. Carmine always knew how to get the best tickets to Steelers games. I told him that Janet would be away on business on Saturday and Sunday. He then told me to plan to spend the weekend with him and the boys. The thought of a weekend away from home and my wife seemed really wonderful. I didn't bother telling Janet about my plans. Friday morning was another cold event for us at breakfast. I briefly asked Janet if I could contact her while she was gone. She very calmly told me not to bother calling her while she was gone because she would be with some very powerful people. Answering her husband's phone calls would make her feel like I was a father checking on his teenage daughter. I did not press this issue any further. That afternoon, Janet took her luggage and headed to the airport and on to Atlantic City. Carmine was very happy to see me. It's been over a year since we met. Apparently, I was one of the few guys from the junior mafia who managed to get out of the old area before spending some time in prison. Carmine also reminded me of the outstanding debt he owed me. If you need anything, JC, just call me and I'll take care of it for you. We spent Saturday evening at a bar in the southeastern part of the city. There were a dozen or more young, scantily clad women dancing on the stage and on their laps in the audience. The cute young thing, she was no more than a day older than her 18th birthday, came over and started shaking her smooth ass in front of my face. "Come on, JC, she's yours for the night if you want her," Carmine said, squeezing her left breast. "Sorry, Carmine, but you know me. I am always true to my wedding vows. I can't say that I don't experience serious temptation, but I believe in loyalty and devotion." I looked at the lovely young stripper and just shook my head no. She pouted for a second, and then moved on to try her luck with another horny male client. "Damn it! You really take this loyalty seriously, don't you, JC?" Carmine said, with some disbelief in his voice. "You understood everything correctly. Without loyalty, there is nothing. No love, no marriage." The next morning was a typical cold, windy day in Pittsburgh. But that didn't matter to the crowd of fans who made their way to the stadium to watch the game between the Steelers and Raiders. There is a bitter rivalry between these two football teams that borders on gang warfare. Ever since the Steelers snatched victory from the jaws of defeat in one of the NFL's most memorable moments, Franco's lucky rebound put Harris on the end of an unlikely catch that changed the outcome of a fantastic defensive effort against the Oakland Raiders in the first ever playoff game at Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. Neither team has forgotten this legacy. It's good that weapons are prohibited on the playing field. The Steelers haven't had a great year. So far in the season, they have 5 wins and 5 losses. Today was supposed to be the biggest game of the season. Silver and black were back in town. It was hard, banging your head on a football field all day. I'm hoarse from all this screaming and yelling, but the final score was 21 for the Steelers, 20 for the Raiders. The day couldn't have ended on a better note. At least that's what I thought. As much as Carmody wanted me to stay and hang out with the rest of the guys, I had to bow out and tell him another time. Tomorrow would be a tough day at the office, and I knew I didn't need a hangover on top of all the other pressures of work. Besides, Janet was coming home tonight, and I wanted to be there when she returned. Janet did not return home on Sunday evening. I left for work Monday morning with some serious doubts running through my mind about recent events in my marriage. Whenever I thought deeply about the state of the relationship between me and Janet, I had a feeling of impending doom. Of course, all marriages have their bumps, but perhaps our marriage has turned into something more than just bumps. The workday was just as stressful as I thought it would be when I left the house in the morning. Several high-level meetings and a harassment lawsuit filed against the company were high on my agenda. It wasn't until 5:30 that I had a chance to sit down and check my email. There were a dozen emails from staff along with the latest information on the lawsuit. Towards the end of the list of emails, there was one that seemed to jump off the screen. It was entitled, "Who Will Be the Last to Know?" When I opened the email, expecting to see some humorous cartoon, I was suddenly confronted with a photo of Janet and another man passionately hugging and kissing on the lips. At the bottom of the photo was a text message that simply said, "Want to know what happened after this? Click on the following link." A chill ran down my spine as I hesitated for a moment, looking at the photo of Janet kissing another man. Then I clicked on the following link. Another photograph appeared on the screen. This time, Janet and the man she was kissing were naked and hugging each other in a motel room. Again, at the bottom of the photo was a text message that simply said, "Want to know what happened after this? Click on the following link." My hand trembled and my throat and chest tightened as the naked image of my wife burned itself into my brain. Part of me didn't want to see the next photo, but I still knew I had to click the link. The next photo was the end of my marriage. The only woman I ever truly loved was nothing more than a cheater, an adulteress, a bitch. I loved her and trusted her with all my heart. Now she was tearing this heart out of my chest. The text at the bottom of the photo simply reads, "Photography partner is Robert Toldson." My worst nightmare had just been thrown in my face. There was no doubt that Janet's coldness towards me over the last couple of months was more than just a wife angry with her husband. Her coldness was akin to the rigor mortis that sets in our dying marriage. What comes after anger and rage? For me, it was a quiet determination that I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was the determination to take revenge that now took up residence in my mind. I will not tolerate infidelity and betrayal in my life. There were two people who would pay for the mortal insult they deliberately inflicted on me. My first thoughts were about the person who sent me the incriminating emails. There was no name or other indication of where the email was sent from. Questions continued to swirl around in my head. Why would anyone send me this email? What did they hope to gain by exposing my wife's infidelity? Were they my friends or Janet's enemies? I'll have to solve this problem later. I inserted the CD into my computer and made a copy of the email along with 3 photos. I then deleted the email and followed it up with a cleaning program that erased the email from my hard drive. I sat back in my swivel chair, trying to figure out why Janet had betrayed our marriage. The only explanation I could come up with was to blame it on Janet's split personality. Still, if she wanted a divorce, I would give her a divorce. We didn't have children, and we both could have walked away from this broken marriage. But now my revenge will be quick and complete. I would take no prisoners and show no mercy to any of them. A plan began to take shape in my head. I walked out of the office building and rounded the corner to the payphone. The number I dialed was an untraceable paper-minute cell phone. "Carmine, I think it's time for me to repay the debt you owe me." When I got home around 7:30, Janet was already at home watching TV. She didn't get up and run over to hug and kiss me. She just looked up and simply said, "You come home late?" "So are you," was my simple answer as I moved into the kitchen. Nothing more was said between the two of us. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and walked down the hall to the spare room I had converted into an office. I locked the door behind me. When a person is convicted of a serious crime in this country, the perpetrator typically faces one of two sentences: death penalty or life imprisonment. My revenge plan included one death penalty and one life sentence. I needed some quiet time to think through the rest of my revenge plan. Carmine will do his part to settle the score with Mr. Robert Toldson for me. Getting even with Janet would be a personal effort on my part. I had to put everything in place so that revenge would seem to the police as a simple matter of a wife running away from her loving husband. Over the next few days, I continued to send flowers to Janet's office so everyone could see that her loving husband still cared about her. I made a dinner reservation at a restaurant near where she worked. I left messages for her to meet me there for dinner. She never showed up. I told the waitress to give our table to someone else. I made sure she remembered how my wife left me. Janet returned home later that evening. There were no explanations given for not showing up for our dinner. The thing is, I just didn't care about anything she had to say in her defense. The die was cast. The wheels of revenge are set in motion. Later the next day, a courier came to my office and handed me an envelope marked personal and confidential. It contained one single sheet of paper. The title was printed in bold: Destroy after reading. The first sentence simply said, "Provide yourself with a reliable alibi for tomorrow evening." The second sentence had a name, Carlos Mandara, and a phone number. I read and reread the phone number until I had it memorized. The piece of paper was then sent through a paper shredder. I picked up the torn pieces to take with me. They will be disposed of in several different trash bins near the office building. That evening, I came home from work before Janet. I changed my clothes, poured myself a Jim Beam, and sat down to listen to my favorite jazz. The TV didn't turn on this evening. This was supposed to be my night as king of my castle. Janet will have to find some way to entertain herself. When Janet returned home, there was no confrontation with her. She quickly assessed the situation, turned around and walked out the door again. I'm not sure where she was going. Maybe to eat, maybe to meet Robert Toldson again. I wouldn't care. The sand in the hourglass was almost empty for the two of them. I was in bed when Janet finally came home and quietly slid into bed next to me. Silence was the loudest sound that could be heard before I fell asleep. Thursday night is a typical poker night for a few guys from work. I played the game a couple of times just to keep in touch with the guys in the office. It's amazing what nuggets of information you can find when guys are chilling with a few drinks in them. The game was played in the back room of the old Stagecoach bar. This was to become my ironclad alibi for the rest of the evening. This time, I was the one who went to bed early in the morning. The clock on my nightstand read 2:35 as I pulled the blanket over me. No sound or movement from Janet. It was not difficult for me to fall asleep, even though I knew what had happened some time ago that evening. Now that Robert Toldson has been sentenced to death, it is time to sentence the second criminal. No immediate action was required for the sentence of life imprisonment. The fact that Janet's punishment would begin shortly after I made the phone call gave me a sense of satisfaction and justice. Whatever it was about Janet's twisted personality that made her feel like she could outright disrespect me in the most disgusting way had to be determined by someone else. I no longer felt any compassion for the woman I had once loved with all my heart and soul. The retribution that was about to befall her was her own doing. The police interviewed all employees of the Calculus Real Estate Agency. They received some interesting but conflicting statements from employees. Janet was one of those whom the police questioned more than once. Detective Lawrence Buckton stopped by the house that evening and questioned me about what I might know about Robert Toldson. I told the detective that I had only met Robert once. It was at a Christmas party that Calculus was throwing for all of its employees and their spouses. Other than that one time, I did not see or speak to Mr. Toldson. The detective tried to ask several questions, concluding that Robert and Janet were probably more than just agency employees. I told him that I had complete faith in my wife's fidelity and saw no reason to doubt her fidelity. He just smiled at me, as if he thought I was a poor, pathetic cuckold. Robert Toldson's funeral took place on Tuesday. That morning, I saw Janet dressed in her black mourning dress, the same one she wore to my mother's funeral. She didn't ask me if I wanted to go with her to Robert's funeral. Whatever she thought about Robert's death, she kept it to herself. I'm sure she had a lot to think about, including murder and her infidelity. Several times over the next week, Janet seemed to want to start a serious discussion about our relationship. My cold attitude towards her quickly caused her attempts to stop immediately. I was beyond any form of reconciliation. I had my finger on the button and could press it any time I wanted to end this charade. 3 weeks after Robert's murder, the police investigation seemed to have ceased. Police were unable to find any new leads. Someone pointed out that there was a possibility that Robert could have been killed by a loan shark or bookmaker. During these 3 weeks, Janet's mental state continued to deteriorate. She seemed more distracted and confused. Little things seemed to frighten her. I didn't offer her any help or comfort, even though I could see she was having a hard time. Suffer. Traitor. Suffer, I thought to myself, watching her slowly fall apart. Finally, the following Thursday, I called Carlos. He already had a plan ready, and he was impatient to begin implementing it. Janet had only a few hours left before her new life began. Friday morning, I left for work before Janet was even dressed. I didn't want to see her this last time in my house. The sand in the hourglass was empty. A car with 2 men in it was parked across the street from our house. The abduction occurred at an intersection where there was a 4-way stop sign. Cars in front and behind Janet's car blocked any attempt by her to move. With the precision of a Delta Force team, the 2 men sprang into action. As soon as the driver's door opened, a needle was stuck in her arm as the seatbelt was cut from her body. Janet was pushed into the passenger seat as one of the men got behind the wheel. 3 cars quickly drove away. The total time taken was less than 30 seconds. There were no witnesses. At 11 hours that morning, at a bank branch located on the east side of town, a woman dressed and looking exactly like Janet walked into the bank and handed the teller a receipt for a $25,000 withdrawal from our joint account. The lady had a driver's license and a passport as identification. It took a few minutes for the cashier to receive the withdrawal in the form of a cashier's check. The security guard escorted the woman to her car. He noticed the license plate as the woman pulled out of the parking lot. The line of passengers at the American Airlines ticket counter was not very long when a woman who looked like Janet walked towards the smiling clerk behind the counter. She took her boarding pass, showing the clerk her photo ID and passport. The flight reservation was made online the night before. The first leg of the trip was to Kennedy Airport, followed by non-stop flight 951 to Rio de Janeiro. Her flight left Pittsburgh at 4:45 p.m. for Kennedy Airport in New York. Then at 10:30 that evening, an American Airlines plane lifted off the runway, taking passenger Janet Canella on an overnight flight to Brazil. I waited until Saturday afternoon before calling the police to report a missing person. Surprisingly, Detective Lawrence Buckton was the officer who came to the house to take the report. I told him that Janet had not returned home at her usual time. I tried to call her cell phone, but received a notification that she was out of work. I called Amanda Stockade, one of Janet's close friends at Calculus. Amanda told me that Janet didn't show up for work yesterday. She didn't even call to report. Detective Buckton was making some cryptic notes in his small notebook. From time to time, he looked up at me. Finally, he started asking questions about my marriage. Did we have problems, and did they have anything to do with Janet's disappearance? I told him the same thing I told him when he interrogated me after the murder of Robert Toldson. Our marriage was wonderful, and I couldn't think of any reason why Janet would voluntarily disappear. He then asked me if I had anything to do with foul play involving Janet. I told him again that I loved my wife and couldn't hurt her. Lying to the police was an acting trait that I developed at a very early age while working with the youth mafia. This still worked well for me. 3 days passed when Detective Buckton came to my office during working hours. I think he wanted to personally evaluate the husband he was dealing with. After being shown into my office, he sat down and gave me a tight smile. "Do you have any news about Janet's whereabouts?" I had my husband's upset face as I asked him if he knew anything about Janet. Yes and no, Mr. Cannella. We followed Janet's activities a little after she left your house on Friday morning. Several people claim to have seen her drinking coffee at the Denny's restaurant on Bennett Street around 10 a.m. Friday. She then showed up at Allegheny National Bank around 11 a.m. We have CCTV footage of her at the cash register withdrawing $25,000 from your joint savings account. Buckton paused to take in the shocked expression on my face. My acting must have been tested because I asked in shocked amazement, "Janet withdrew $25,000 from our savings account? This is impossible. She didn't tell me anything about wanting to withdraw money." The facts are pretty clear. The cashier made photocopies of Janet's driver's license and passport before writing the cashier's check. I'm confident that once you see the security footage, you'll be able to identify the person at the cashier's window as your wife, Janet. Once again, Buckton paused to gauge my reaction to his revelation. I still think there must be some mistake here, Detective. Janet and I talked about everything that was going on in our marriage. I'm sure she would tell me if she needed a large amount of money. My confused look confirmed my words as I stared at the police detective again. I knew the detective was holding back the worst news until the last minute. I needed to prepare for another encore. The most alarming news, Mr. Cannella, is that your wife bought plane tickets to New York and then to Rio de Janeiro. We found her car in the long-term airport parking lot. Her flight left Pittsburgh on Friday afternoon at 4:45, followed by her flight to Rio, leaving New York at 10:30. We contacted the Rio de Janeiro police in hopes of finding Janet. She seems to have disappeared as soon as she arrived in Rio. Buckton was now looking at me intently, waiting for my reaction. No. This is madness, I shouted to him. Janet would never do anything like that. I know she loves me and I love her. Leaving the country is nonsense. Spit it out, Buckton. I said this while playing out the devoted husband scenario for the detective. I cried right in front of him. There was silence in my office for a minute or so before the detective spoke again. Do you think this has something to do with the murder of Robert Toldson? What? How dare you even ask this question? My wife had nothing to do with this murder. You questioned her yourself. She was never accused of anything related to this case. We never charged your wife, Mr. Cannella, but she was first on our list of suspects. Several other people we spoke to told us that they suspected that your wife and Mr. Toldson were lovers. His eyes seemed to be boring holes into my head. You must be joking. First you tell me all this nonsense about my wife leaving the country, and then you accuse her of involvement in Toldson's murder. You better have more evidence than some office gossip to back it up. My eyes drilled holes into his head. We're still working on this case, Mr. Cannella. Now that your wife has left the country, our suspicions about her involvement in the murder have increased. He paused for a long time. There was evidence at the crime scene that the murder was more than just a gangland hit for money. The wounds on Toldson's body indicated that there was a sexual overtone to the murder. Toldson was tortured and beaten for several hours before he was strangled. I let out a quiet chuckle as I answered. And you think my petite wife did all this? She can barely open a jar of pickles, let alone strangle someone. Your accusations seem to become more ridiculous every time you open your mouth. I wanted it to sound like I was mad at Buckton. Perhaps so, Mr. Cannella. But all the evidence so far points to your wife's involvement. Perhaps someone else helped her. He paused and licked his lips. And you think I was that other person? I shot back at him before he said another word. We thought you might have been involved, but you had a solid alibi for the time of the murder. His voice sounded unconvinced. Okay, let me make this clear. You come here today, telling me that you haven't found my wife, but you think she left the country because she was involved in a murder? You also implied that I was a likely suspect for helping her in this murder. I paused, looking straight at him. So, did I understand everything correctly? Detective? He just sat there, looking back at me, trying to determine if my outrage was just false bravado. Is there anything else, Detective? I asked with a hint of contempt in my voice. If not, then this meeting is over. I got up from the table and headed towards the closed door. I opened the door to indicate that it was time for him to leave. Buckton rose from his chair and slowly walked towards the door. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Cannella. I will keep you posted on the progress in finding your wife." He didn't extend his hand, and I didn't extend mine. I closed the door after the detective left and leaned back in my swivel chair. I was sure that Buckton's visit was intended to find out more information than to give me any significant information about the two cases. I slowly thought about every statement he made and every question he asked. He was sure that he felt that I might have been involved in one or both of the cases he was handling. However, my alibi was reliable. I was playing poker the Thursday night Robert Toldson was killed, and I was in meetings all day last Friday when Janet went missing. It was Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Janet disappeared. I haven't heard anything from Carlos or Carmine. I had no idea where Janet was or what had happened to her in the last 2 weeks. There were several times when I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched when I went to work in the morning and when I returned home in the evening. My movements were very carefully planned. To work, back home, and for groceries on the way home. Nothing that could be mistaken for evasive behavior or the actions of someone trying to hide something. I called Buckton every other day to find out about my missing wife. He had nothing new to say. Brazilian police found no evidence of Janet's presence after her arrival in Rio. That day I called Domino's to order pizza while I sat watching football on TV. The doorbell rang, and the pizza delivery guy was standing there with my hot pizza. I paid him and tipped him a couple of bucks. When I opened the pizza box in the kitchen, there was an envelope on top of the pizza. I opened the envelope and pulled out a piece of paper. "Be at church tomorrow morning. Go to Mass at 10 Odzios in St. Peter's Basilica. During communion, slip out the side door on the east side of the church. There will be a dark Ford Crown Victoria waiting for you outside. Get in." I held the piece of paper in my hand, knowing that this would be the last time I saw Janet before Carlos sent her out of the country. He waited 2 weeks to make sure the cover-up plan for Janet to fly out of the country was well documented, and that was all the evidence the police had to work on. This was an elaborate deception perpetrated by Carlos to misdirect the investigation. He also established the fact that Janet was alive when she boarded the plane in Rio. That way, the police wouldn't be able to try to prove that I killed Janet, even though no body was found. The bedroom was completely dark as I stared at the ceiling. The last month and a half have been a real nightmare for me. After receiving this email, the chain of events that occurred reminded me that my ancestral roots would always bring out the dark side of my personality whenever anyone disrespected me, nature or nurture. I had no doubt about where my dark side came from. St. Peter's Basilica is a very large church. Several hundred parishioners attend the 10 a.m. Mass. It was easy to get lost in the crowd and notice if anyone was following me. If the police were following me, they must have been waiting outside the church. As the crowd of people moved to the front of the church for communion, I quickly slipped out the side door. A dark Ford sedan was waiting with the engine running. I got into the back seat as the car roared out onto the busy street. The drive took about 10 minutes before the sedan stopped in front of a large warehouse building. The driver didn't even turn around. He just told me to enter the building through the side door. The inside of the large building was very empty. Near the back was an office area with light pouring in from several windows. As I approached the office, Carlos came out and walked towards me. This was my first personal meeting with Carlos. "Hi, JC." He paused and smiled. "Carmine told me it would be nice to call you JC." His hand was extended and I shook it. "Are you sure you want to see your wife again?" "The last few weeks have not been very pleasant for her." Carlos maintained a stony expression on his face. His words were a warning that I might be upset when I saw Janet this time. "I don't care what she looks like or what she's been through since you took her." I headed towards the open door. "Is she currently taking any illegal substances?" I asked, stopping at the door. "No, but I'm sure she would like it to be so." I kept it clean and very conscious all the time. She is now a broken woman and well prepared for her new life. We both entered a well-lit room. Janet stood in the center of the room. Her arms were extended above her head. Her wrists were tied together and attached to a chain that came down from the ceiling. She was oblivious to my presence, standing there motionless. I walked over to where she was chained. Her dull, empty eyes were fixed straight ahead. She didn't make a sound. I didn't tell her anything. My eyes stopped trailing down her back when I noticed a fresh mark on her lower back. The brand was a coiled snake about 4 inches in diameter. Her new owner insisted that she be branded with his mark before she was sent to him. Carlos paused and then added, "You really don't want to know his name. She hasn't said anything to me since I entered the room. Did you do something to her tongue?" I asked Carlos quietly, approaching her from the other side. He grinned at me and answered, "I told you she's a broken woman. She has no will of her own. She does everything I tell her without hesitation." I didn't let her talk. I walked around her and stood right in front of her. We were inches apart. She still didn't say anything. Her gaze was directed directly over my shoulder. There was no longer any sparkly or vitality in her eyes. "For the rest of your life, Janet, you will remember that you brought all this suffering upon yourself. I put up with all your mood swings and your cold attitude towards me, but I couldn't accept your infidelity. For the disrespect and cuckolding that came my way, you will now spend the rest of your life paying for your adultery. Robert has already paid me his debt. He has ended his life." My words were spoken slowly and clearly as I looked into her tormented face. I wanted her to know that I was the one who brought her lover to justice and his terrible death. "As much as I once loved you, I want you to know that it's just as much as I hate you now." Carlos assured me that wherever they send you, you will be well taken care of, just as well as they take care of their best horses and cattle. I stood still for a second when I saw a large tear roll down Janet's cheek. That was all the recognition and awareness I got from her. Her body remained motionless as I turned and left the room. The Ford sedan took me back to St. Peter's Basilica, where I entered just as the 11 a.m. Mass was just ending. I left the church and drove out of the parking lot straight home. There was a tight knot in my stomach that needed to be quenched with some alcohol. It's been 3 years since I last saw Janet. I almost completely forgot about her. There are no traces of her in my life anymore. I even sold the house we lived in during her disappearance. Both Buckton cases were moved to the unsolved case file. Marriage is out of the question for me. My 5 years with Janet were enough to convince me that women are more trouble than they're worth when you marry them. My parents were right to regret my involvement with Janet. Someone once told me that children should listen to the advice of their parents. Children rarely listen. I later found out that it was Amanda Stockada who sent me the email. She appears to have been Robert Toldson's mistress before he left her for Janet. I never thanked her for the email and never found out how she got those photos of Robert and Janet. I think she took revenge on both of them with this. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.